Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm John Field. I'm the Executive Secretary here at the Pacific Salmon Commission. I'm based in Vancouver. Good to see all of you here yet again at a in-person meeting, our 2024 postseason meeting for the PSC. I wanted to do a little scene setting for those of you who might be new to the PSC or wondering why we've structured today's discussion the way we have. This is part of a monthly seminar series that was launched in 2021 through the Southern Panel's work plan. Ever since then, it's been guided by a small steering committee from Southern Panel and Coho Tech Committee members and the Secretariat to choose topics, find speakers, and put the event on roughly every 30 days. Each one of those events has fallen under the general theme of environmental variation and Pacific salmon management, getting views from each side of the border. So those of you who have participated in the past will have seen research presented from a Canadian and American scientist or technical expert on things ranging from the North Pacific blob to hatchery interactions, salmon ecology changes. All of those have been limited to PSC delegates by invitation only, but all of them have been recorded and they're all on our YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and have a cup of coffee and see something that interests you on a YouTube channel, you can do it that way, and that's available to the public generally. Today's format, as you can tell, is a little different. The steering committee decided that this meeting, being in person and being fairly central to the lower mainland in BC and Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, would be a good way to hear directly from people involved in the salmon harvest sector or with ties to it, representing them. The idea here is to learn about how environmental change has affected them or their industry, their harvest sector, how they perceive the readiness of the management framework for Pacific salmon for environmental change, and then thoughts about the future moving ahead. Our program will spend the next 10 minutes or so doing brief introductions from our 6 panelists. We'll then move into a series of three sets of questions on perspectives on environmental impacts, on fishing through time. Then we'll pivot to the second set of questions talking about how well the current management structure is set up to address environmental change. And then finally, a set of questions prompting the panelists to talk about the path ahead. And then we'll have the last 20 minutes adjourning at about 1:30 to take questions from the audience, both here in person and online. So with that, why don't I turn it over to our 6 panelists? We'll just kind of start from my left and go down. If you could just take a minute, introduce yourself, your connection to the PSC, and the harvest sector that you're tied to. Maureen.
We're live.
We are live.
Sometimes I want to sing in front of these things, but I won't. Good afternoon, everybody. My ancestral name is Clawsonton. I'm from Seamas First Nation. We're one of the Stalo bands in the Lower Fraser, Southern BC region. And I've been with the Pacific Salmon Commission since 2013, thanks to Sue Farlinger. And been First Nations Commissioner and associated that way. I've worked on the Chinook interface group for some time until we found some more capacity in my commissioner colleague, Russ Jones, and he's taken on that work. In terms of the work that I do on a day-to-day basis, I'm the executive director of the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance. We're a regime of about 30 First Nations in the Lower Fraser. It's about a 200 kilometer stretch of river. And currently we have 24 First Nations in a society and a governance protocol. So we initially worked on just engagement and working on having a good foundation to have a relationship with one another, and then working with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans and the province and stakeholders. And we have a governance protocol that looks after most of the work that we do. So from a provincial scale, I'm able to engage, and through that work, I'm able to engage with the First Nations Fisheries Council, who's our provincial regime in the province of BC, and associated with numerous steering committees and working groups there. Thank you.
Ta'atula. Good afternoon. My name is McCoy Oatman. My Nimipu Nez Perce name is Timuni, which translates to gun. This name was given to me because of during the Nez Perce War, 1877. one of my great grandmothers had to recover some rifles for the warriors, and so then that's where my father gave me that name. I am a 7th generation descendant of old Chief Looking Glass, and he was one of the principal signers of the Treaty of 1855. And so my ancestry, I am Nez Perce. The easiest way to explain where I come from is if you take the Washington and Oregon border, follow that in Idaho. That's principally where my reservation is located. I've served on the commission since 2011, representing the 4 Columbia River tribes, the Nez Perce, Umatilla, Yakima, and Warm Springs. Take great pride in that. Also, my wife, her mother is Lummi and Tulalip, and so I have 3 daughters, so they also carry that lineage as well. When I first got involved in the PSC process, I think it was my first day, they said, "Oh yeah, you got to go." We were in Portland. They said, "You got to go to the SIG meeting." And I didn't even know like what SIG meant, or didn't know any of the acronyms. And so we went down into the winery cellar downstairs, and we all crammed into a little room. So it's really, really interesting to see how even the SIG has evolved over that time, where now we got to meet in a big room and there's quite a few people that are in the peanut gallery. But, understanding, the importance of Chinook and what it means to all the different nations, I take great pride in representing the tribes in this forum. I formerly served on our tribal council for 12 years. I was elected when I was 30 years old, and then, served for 12 years in all different capacities for my tribe. I served as our tribal chairman for a year, treasurer, assistant secretary, treasurer, and also chaired various subcommittees for my tribe. I've also represented my tribe in an interagency bison management council. So if you're not aware, the 4 tribes also go into Yellowstone to hunt bison as well, and so we're part of that management as well. So it just kind of illustrates, the impact of our tribal treaty rights. When I was on council, 1 week I could be down on the Columbia River meeting on fishery management, and then within the next week I could be in Gardner, Montana, meeting on how we manage our bison. And so that's a big geographic area, but take great pride in that. With the treaties that were negotiated by my ancestors, they had tremendous foresight in how they came to those agreements with the United States government. And so part of us being here as tribal people is to continue in that legacy and make sure that our rights that we reserved are well taken care of for the future generations. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name's John McCulloch. I'm the Canadian Commissioner representing the Recreational Fishery and the Sport Fish Advisory Board. A bit about myself. I was born and grew up in the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island. Had a salmon creek in my backyard, and just kind of grew up thinking that everybody had one of those. But I realized how fortunate I was. I grew up in a fishing family, and was able to have been able to fish up and down the entire BC coastline. My day job is I manage and oversee the operations of a fishing lodge on Langer Island in Haida Gwaii, and I've been privileged to have been able to work and fish there since 1987. In that coming out of that process, I was able to start to get involved with the Sport Fishing Advisory Board, which in Canada is the board that gives advice to the Minister of Fisheries regarding fisheries related items. And I've been involved with that since the early 90s, and got involved with the PSC as the first year was 2000 in Portland. And just after the 99 treaty had got renegotiated, and first met a whole bunch of people that are at this table and in the room today in 2000. And then in 2013, I first met Murray when we became commissioners in 2013 in Ketchikan. And looking forward to this discussion today, and appreciate your organizing this. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Good afternoon. I'm Ron Allen. I am the chair or CEO for the Jamestown S'Klallam tribe. Our tribe is located across from Victoria, across the Strait of Juan de Fuca. We have a sister S'Klallam tribe to the east of us, Port Gamble S'Klallam, and to the west of us, Lower Elwha S'Klallam. And so we're three bands of the same people. I've been involved with the PSC process since the beginning. I was there when we negotiated back in 84, 85. And I was on the Fraser River for a panel for quite a while, and then became a commissioner, I think around 93, 94, something like that. So I've been very involved with fisheries at multiple levels. So I'm very active for my tribe. I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., unfortunately, advocating for tribal sovereignty and treaty rights and issues that are of great importance to our tribes.
You want to fight over it?
Okay. We can use two, we can duel.
Thanks, Ron. My name's Sue Farlinger. I've been working, I came from the East Coast, and when I graduated, there was much talk about, well, if you want to get involved in fisheries, you have to go to the East Coast, because really, you know, it's quite a bit different on the West Coast. But I'd been here once, and for all the people in this room, you know that if you've ever been here, you really never go anywhere else. So that's what I did. And so I spent the next 40 years or so working in fisheries, primarily with federal government. And during that time, I ended up working as a commissioner, I think since 2010, on and off. I've been blamed for Murray, but you know, I think actually I should get a badge for it, but all I get is abuse. And I think I'd like to say that I found out during the negotiations for the last agreement, in which I certainly participated and really saw people on both sides of the commission table at the technical level, at the panel level, and all the way through this organization. You know, first of all, an extraordinary organization that is not duplicated anywhere in terms of involvement and the number of people who are involved at every level. And secondly, that I was the same age as Ron Allen. And when I discovered that, I realized that although I might be the same age, I had a long road to go in terms of building up to the same level of wisdom and knowledge as Ron. So I've had a chance to learn a lot from Ron and other commissioners and other folks in the process since that time. I think that one of the reasons that involvement in this process is so complex and involves so many people is because really it's very hard to think of another creature that touches and is influenced by as many ecosystems as salmon is. And as a person interested in biology and a naturalist, and you know, going back to the 60s when joining Greenpeace was, you know, part of our mantra at that point, salmon is a real beacon. And for those people who know and love and live on the West Coast, there really isn't anything with a stronger pull than that. So being part of this process is a great privilege, in spite of the fact, you know, that I still have something to learn. But thanks very much, and happy to participate in this.
Good afternoon. My name is Russell Thomas, and I'm a sport fishing lodge operator in Ketchikan. My parents moved up there from Southern Idaho, moved to Ketchikan. Like Sue said, when they saw Alaska, they fell in love with it. My dad got into float planes and started flying and operated a business until I was about 10 years old. And at that time, they got into the hospitality business by opening a fishing lodge and a hotel in Ketchikan. And since that time, my siblings and I have grown up in the business, and then have since taken over from my parents, who are semi-retired now. My association with the PSC, I was appointed to the Northern Panel in the mid-2000s and was part of the renegotiation in 2009 and then 2019. Right before the 2019 negotiation, I was appointed to the Transboundary Panel and served there as the personal use subsistence representative for a little while. Now I'm back on the Northern Panel. So I feel a little outmatched here with all these commissioners, but I'm happy to participate as a fisherman and a member of the Northern Panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Before we get into the first set of questions, for those of you standing around the perimeter, if you'd like to come up, there are a lot of seats in the front and sort of in the middle here, if you want to take this moment during the break to get comfortable. The first two questions I wanted to pose, I'll pose as a pair, and the panelists can speak out in any order they want. I don't necessarily need to go down from left to right or right to left, but I'd like you to think about and relay your thoughts about how environmental change has affected salmon fishing in your community, or the one that you represent, over the last few decades, and what have been the most important drivers of that change, in your opinion. Someone want to take a first crack at that? Ron.
Well, I'll jump into it. When I first got involved, you know, in the 80s, you know, one of the big issues for my tribe, my tribe is a very small tribe. We only have about 550 tribal citizens, but we were a tribe that had to work hard at becoming recognized by the federal government so that we could exercise our treaty right so that our people could go fishing. And so our sister tribes were already in the water and already fishing and in exercising their treaty rights. And so we wanted to get involved. So we started building our fishery, fin fisheries, sockeye and pink and coho and chinook, and it was going great there in the 80s and into the early 90s. But for us, because of climate change and the declining resource abundance due to the environment and growth, because I look at both of them as key factors that have diminished the resource base to what I keep calling sustainable levels. All of a sudden, there just wasn't enough salmon to sustain our boats. And so they shifted over into shellfish. So quite frankly, we do still fish fin fish, but mostly on the rivers and whatever is available for the rivers. So it definitely has had an impact. It changed the option for us, and it happened to a lot of our sister tribes in the Puget Sound Saley Sea area. So it certainly has changed how they can continue to sustain you know, a seafood lifestyle for their families. So it certainly has had an impact, and without a doubt, the climate change and the impact to the environment, et cetera, have been a key component to that shift in our arena. It's also having an impact on shellfish too. But so far it's not been as dramatic as finfish.
Thanks, Ron. Anyone else have some thoughts on that first pair of questions? Russell, please.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in really quick. I think in general, sometimes when we're talking about climate change, we think about it only in a negative way. And in Alaska, at least in Southeast Alaska, we've seen some, in some years it's very positive what's going on out in the environment right now, even though we know there are warming temperatures and ocean conditions are changing. But when we look, we had a discussion, as a group, discussing some of these issues. And one of the things we talked about was that, in the 60s and 70s, runs were horrible. If we were to have a run like we did, 50, 60 years ago, we would think that the earth, the sky was falling on us right now. But we peaked in the 80s and we've seen some kind of, highs and lows since then. The blob, created some problems in the environment that affected our fishery. Last year, we had some of the strongest runs we've seen in a long time. And so, I think there are lots of factors, and of course, there's lots of people smarter than me and that are working on, what those factors are and how they affect the fishery. But in some cases, I think climate change has created some winners in some places and maybe some losers in others, just based on where those fish are going and the ability to find food and, predators and all sorts of things that are out in the environment.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Russell. Please, Murray.
Yeah, maybe counter that a little bit. And mine is maybe a little bit more about doom and gloom that's occurring in our territories with environmental change, climate change, and really about the impacts on salmon fishing and opportunity. And more we're seeing things like routine floods, followed by droughts, low snowpacks, and wildfires, heat domes, and those kinds of occurrences. And they're happening more regularly. When I think about the reductions in fishing opportunity, and maybe it's attributed to accumulative impacts besides environmental change, I need to quantify that, in my mind at least, what's happened. I've been fishing for about 4.5 decades. Getting close to 60 now, and I think they call me a junior elder at home. But in the early 1990s, we were able to fish in our territory 3 days a week, every week, all year. No questions asked. There was enough abundance. DFO they licensed it, opened until closed, basically. And today, when I look at the fisheries that occur today, we're about 15 days annually. We get an opportunity for Chinook in the summer, about 7 or 8 days, and then chum another 7 or 8 days in the fall. And so really when I look at that, that's about 10% of what kind of access I had 3 short decades ago. So really inability to fish, inability to practice the fishery, inability to share the knowledge with the next generation, my grandchildren. I actually have a couple of grandchildren now too, so we get them out on the river now and then. But really, that's about 90% loss of who I was only three short decades ago, right? And so for my grandchildren and others, they've got a 10% chance of opportunity between now and the time that I live. So, this is about 3 or 4 decades in the making, the kind of returns that we're not seeing that were occurring back then. So I really think it's going to take another 4 or 5 decades before we see the kind of abundance if we really invest time in trying to change the patterns that we've seen today. So just thought I'd share that.
Thanks, Murray. Sue?
Thank you. I'll touch on a few things that people have already said, but I think the big picture, whether you look at this from 10 years ago or 50 years ago or 1,000 years ago, overall, things are just changing at a considerably greater pace than they have, or humans, I guess, have experienced in the last 50 years. And so it really behooves us to look at things like the number of people trying to use fish or who need fish to eat, the increase in population worldwide, but that's everywhere. That's here. There are more people trying to share what is a resource that fluctuates over time, but for a long time, you know, built, and the periodicity of change in the environment and in the fish in the environment was not something that there were enough people to notice, really. Well, just not the case now. We have seen in both our countries, on both sides of the border, considerably more people. We've seen relationships between people change. We've seen all those things, and what's happening now is it's all kind of coming to a point for us. And it really doesn't matter whether you're talking about access for commercial fishing, access for food, access for subsistence fishing, access for spiritual purposes. All of that is challenged because there are way more of us trying to do that. Well, there are way more of us trying to do that in the context where not only are the number of people changing that fast, but the environment is changing, as we all know. I mean, I don't think there are any among us, even those folks who were convinced of the need to pay more attention to the climate 50 and 60 years ago, who are not shocked by the rate of change that we see today and the impact on the environment. And there is no greater canary in the mine for us than Pacific salmon. So in terms of immediate impacts, everybody's access has been affected. Our ability to know what will happen in any given year has been affected. We see far greater fluctuations in salmon stock size and in the interactions of salmon. And gradually, as we began to deal with the impacts of more people having access to salmon, we also have to deal now with the impacts of having the situation both in freshwater and in the marine environment that affect the salmon, that we clearly see as that canary in the mine, as fundamentally as a token or a totem of living here on the West Coast. So the access really has changed. People don't know when the salmon's going to be there. They don't know if there's going to be a whole lot. They don't know if there's going to be a little. And later on, I'm sure we'll get to the point that this requires a certain amount of much greater flexibility and nimbleness in our processes than we've ever had to use before. So if you were to look at the signing of this this particular treaty in '85 and the cooperation, the various ways of cooperating between the two countries or between communities and nations in the area, it's all different. And so we have to really at this point face that difference. I think another element other than access, which is, I suppose, the business element, is the infrastructure. The infrastructure has changed, you know, in a variety of ways over the years. And in Canada, we went from having hatcheries or not hatcheries. Well, we do have those too. Processing facilities and selling fish up and down the coast, whether it evolved from selling trade between nations or selling between First Nations through to processing plants in the quote all citizens fishery, I'm going to call it. Those are all gone. Those distinctions are gone. And we simply don't have the infrastructure or the stability in the infrastructure. And this infrastructure has to operate in a global market now. It didn't 50 years ago, frankly, and now it does. And so there are some really big challenges in terms of, first of all, our ability to be nimble and flexible to survive in years when there are not fish in a particular area or there's very low abundance, and our ability to benefit from fish in years of high abundance, and that the areas are changing. There's so many streams and ocean environments that support these fish. Is our ability to be nimble is really going to affect our access. And that's a very different problem for people who live in one place in a small community and don't move versus people who have the ability to move up and down the coast. And we've got to do this together. And so there are things like how we increase that flexibility to both respect the conservation needs, which are changing in a very different way than we've had to deal with in the past, and also access needs. And I would say in terms of this arrangement that we have, which has been fundamentally pretty stable since, okay, we had a little hiccup there in the 90s, but pretty stable since the agreement was first signed in 1985. We've seen things in our panels and technical groups and at the commission level where slowly we begin to accept the fact that we are living in this environment that we have very little control over, and we're going to have to develop our arrangements between each other so that we have the kind of flexibility and the different kind of capacity to assess the fish, to protect the fish, to access the fish, and then to do something with it.
Thanks, McCoy.
Yeah, just to briefly touch on, I guess, how the environmental changes has impacted the 4 Columbia River tribes. It's been a tremendous impact. You consider my tribe in particular. We live above 8 dams, and so there's a lot that the fish have to navigate in order to make it back to their spawning grounds. They have to go through the gauntlet of all the fisheries, but also the warming ocean conditions, the blob, and how that impacts them, and then also to come back into the Columbia and have to make it through all those man-made lakes pretty much that sit behind the dams. And so that impacts the how many fish we have coming back. It also has been noticed that there's been a change in the size of the fish. We used to have some fish that would come up, they call the June hogs, and we no longer have those anymore. The fish are getting even smaller, and then also even to get our brood stock, once the river's warm, you get into the Columbia, you get into the Snake. Once the rivers reach such high temperatures, the fish aren't moving, and you can even see the impacts on them physically, and so then it creates another management burden to us as tribal managers, and it also impacts us culturally, spiritually. When the first salmon comes back, we have a first salmon ceremony, and even those dates are changing, and the elders and those that have been fishing for many decades, are seeing these changes, and so it impacts even our ceremonies. And I really believe, we're in unprecedented times. I have 3 young daughters, and I'm very worried about the future state of the salmon and how many salmon we're going to have going into the future. And if there's not some dramatic changes that occur within the system, it's going to heavily impact us. Right now, the 4 Columbia River tribes are working to get the 4 Snake River dams removed, and we're on that 11th hour. We're past the 11th hour of needing to make those dramatic changes. We've tried every tool in the toolbox to bring these fish back, but unless we start to, impact their habitat, the other thing that's happening too is, like Murray discussed, low snowpack. It's getting hotter in the summer. We're having when one of my daughters was born in 2015, we had fires, that whole summer. And even Ron remarked to me the other day that he came to our reservation to do a presentation, and it was just the unhealthy air, just because of the fires, and we're having more fires. And then once the fires occur, that it's just like a cycle that continues. And then you have landslides that impact the tribal or impact the fish, the habitat. And so, there's just I guess it's an endless list that we have that's impacting our fish. And it's imperative upon us now, if we want to continue to have this resource for future generations, that we look at all measures that we can take to improve habitat and help the salmon throughout their entire life cycle.
Thanks, McCoy. John.
Well, much has already been said, and I'll just make a few additional points from a recreational fishery perspective and community, and all fisheries. The values associated with salmon fishing are incredibly high at so many levels. And in the BC recreational fishery, there is a significant and large infrastructure that is in place, and drives a huge social and economic value program. So very valuable. What I have noticed over all the years is that change is constant in the fishing world. There is no two seasons alike. Every day is different on the water at some level. But what has happened is, my observations are that that the rate of change has increased. How big the fluctuations are, how the old models don't work so well anymore. The old Sally, same as last year, it's not the same anymore. And what is amazingly, what fishermen are amazingly good at, fishers, is adapting to change. And you do it every day on the water in one way or another. And from a management perspective, we need the information, first of all, to be as good as possible, so that we can manage the fisheries as flexibly and as quickly as we can. And so coming up with next year's integrated fisheries management plan, which is challenging now, anytime going forward, we're going to be having to look 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and lifetimes down the road at ways that we can adjust to these changes that are going on. And I'm recently becoming a grandfather for the second time. I realize how fast my life has gone by and the changes that I've seen. And I just think it's important for us that we have a succession plan of fisheries and fisheries management, which includes our young people, and that we get our children and our young people out on the water and fishing and exposed to those same values that we have had the great benefit of being with. And that's our hope. They're our hope for our future. So we need to get everyone involved and work on this. Thanks.
Thanks, John. think we're ready to pivot to the next set of questions. I'll try to encapsulate a few points that everyone raised. I heard Ron lead us off by saying that environmental change has altered how the Jamestown Slalom tribes and other coastal tribes in the region have had to prosecute fisheries, moving into river fisheries, and even changing the species complex that they're pursuing for food security and cultural security. I heard Russell talk about environmental change actually helping some of the ecosystem in Southeast Alaska and being a boon to run size in recent years, and how that's a counterpoint to a lot of the negative news that we hear elsewhere in the region. Murray talked about that negative news and how people in First Nations, including Sumas, have been reduced to 10% of their historical access. And this is a threat to cultural stability and the way of life and food security. That was echoed by McCoy as well, talking about habitat degradation and how there needs to be concerted effort beyond, now that we are beyond the 11th hour, to take action because of the upriver tribes being so constrained in what they have access to and what they need. Sue talked about the fact that there are a lot more people on the planet than there were 50 years ago when we first started trying cooperative salmon management up and down the coast. Huge amount of pressure on the habitat, huge amount of pressure on the resource, while the resource is struggling to keep up with environmental change brought about by that growing human population. And John wrapped us up by talking about how culturally important salmon fisheries are, sport fisheries included, and how change is the constant that salmon management needs to address, and planning needs to happen much more efficiently and quickly than it has in the past. And that getting the next generation, as some of the other speakers talked about, getting the next generation exposed and engaged is important. Pivoting to the next set of questions, there might be some comfortable answering this. There might be others who want to take a pass. That's fine. We can just take it organically here as people have ideas come to them. There are three questions. Maybe I'll start off with touching on some of the things that I think John left us off with, and that is, what can the PSC do to improve salmon abundance, productivity, and resiliency? And I think that's tied into one of the other questions that the panel saw ahead of time, and that's how salmon management can contend with increasing environmental uncertainty. Does anyone have any thoughts about what we can do within our current fisheries management framework? Sue.
I'll start off and try to be brief, which is not my strength, but I think that, first of all, we have to respect the fact that in every tribe, in every community, in every First Nation, in every fishing lodge, in every commercial fishing operation, people have a different view. And we've made a lot of progress, I would say, in the last 50 years in bringing people together and having people talk to each other. But the climate we live in now is one that's, extraordinarily polarized. And this is where the strength of an organization like this, where people who disagree on almost every level can sit down together and talk to each other about the challenges that we collectively are facing, and how to look for solutions. And no silver bullets. We all know that. It's going to be hard. It's going to be complicated. It's going to take all kinds of compromise on all sides to be able to respond to the situation we're in. But if you say, okay, I'm not going to talk about the difference between how fish are managed in Washington and Oregon and Alaska and Canada, I'm going to talk about the Commission and the work we do here. I see some encouraging signs. We have the work of the Committee on Scientific Cooperation kind of bearing down on those ephemeral climate change issues we've been sort of poking at for years, but never really kind of pulling down and seeing what it means for us. And you see this group taking a broad look. You see them talking to the panels and the chairs, see them reporting back to the commissioners, trying to give us a sense of how what we have now can be better. I think you also see for the very first time after this most recent agreement, a section of the various technical committees, and I'm going to point to the Chinook Technical Committee here, that is dedicating people, time, and effort to modernizing how we do assessments, and at the very least trying to take into better account all the information that we have, sometimes not at our fingertips, but information that is accessible, and how we can kind of look forward and adjust, recreate, whatever the word is, to take a look at a modernized way of doing assessments that takes into account both a myriad of challenges that we face with climate change and, quite frankly, all the other changes we're talking about, as well as simply just making improvements. I think those are two very different levels of things. But I also think there's an opportunity here, maybe in this negotiation coming up, maybe in the one after, I don't know when it will happen, but to take a look at the whole structure of the treaty. I mean, we have chapters that are either based on species or based on geography. Each chapter is unique. They have very, very different methodologies, very different interests in terms of the peoples and communities involved in each of those chapters. You know, it may be that we can find the kind of flexibility and a bit more certainty, but the fact is we just got to build something that can deal with uncertainties. So there are some ongoing processes, but there are also some things to start thinking about in our heads in terms of how we take this forward, you know, how we're going to deal with things that are arising. There's nothing that isn't changing. You know, whether you are talking about fish habitat or migration patterns or the oceans. So I think there are a number of ways that the Salmon Treaty, the Salmon Commission itself can orient, pay attention to the kind of work that's going on currently with, as I mentioned, the Committee on Scientific Cooperation and the panels. Pay attention to the kind of work that's going on in the technical committees, where dedicated people are taking the time to look out to try and develop things that you know, will help us in the future. I mean, it's really the same thing as personal development. I mean, we learned to do things when we were 5 and 10 and 20 and 30 that no longer serve us, and this organization has to do the same thing, I think.
Thanks, Sue. Ron, please.
Well, I certainly agree with Sue's points, and without a doubt, we're all in this together, and each brings different skill sets and knowledge and techniques that to help us do our job. I always think of PSC as it's a harvest management regime from north to south, and we have to keep a mindful eye on the other H's, the hatcheries and the habitat, the environment that we're talking about, you know, and the hydro systems, and removing hydro systems and finding alternatives, you know, to reduce the impacts on spawning grounds, etc. So I mean, we're way better today than we were 30 years ago, 40 years ago. We just have better skill sets and better knowledge and better techniques and so forth. So, and we're all fighting for the survival of all species of the salmon. So we have to stay focused on that. So I couldn't agree more with Sue that the spirit that we bring to the table, that we can find a way to find common ground. So I know it's an easy phrase, easier said than done, but if you don't move in with that kind of spirit, you're making a huge mistake. So the environment and climate change is just real. You know, the snowpacks are diminishing, you know, the water in the river water management factors, you know, that you know, how much water is in the river, why the salmon are coming back up to spawn, you know, do they have resting spots? And so my view, my tribe's view is do what you can where you are. It's a part of the salmon solution. Do what you can where you are. In my backyard, you know, we have a number of rivers and creeks, and we install woody debris so the salmon have a place to rest. We negotiate with agriculture communities so we can open up floodplain zones, so we reduce the power of the river when it's coming down and washing out spawning grounds. Those kinds of things are progressive things that you can do. With the snowpack dropping, you know, we're even negotiating for a reservoir to capture the water when it's abundant in the winter, so that the farmers have water to they don't have to draw from the river. Those kinds of things are things that help us do our job in our respective areas. Our world is changing, and we in Washington State, we've noticed that every 10 years we grow by another 1 million people. So more homes, more buildings, more businesses, you know, more highways. Are we building highways the right way? Do they have the right culverts? We're rapidly trying to change and replace culverts so the salmon can get through. And so those kinds of things, being aggressive in those kind of forums. So we leave here as we're dealing with management of the allocation of what's available out there from north to south. But then we go home and then our job is not done. Our job is not done. We have to manage the salmon wherever we are, and then deal with our political forum. We in Washington State, you know, we in the United States, and you know, in Washington D.C. laws and rules and regulations and then we try to force them to do the job to protect salmon, protect habitat. You know, growth is okay as long as it's done responsibly and in balance. So growth is good, but salmon and habitat is good too. We have to coexist. We have to change the way we do business. And in my backyard, I was glad that Sue and John and the others were coming to my backyard. And I could show them a creek that the farmers back then thought they should straighten the creek out. And then get to the credit of our natural resources. No. All this land we bought around the creek, we're gonna take that creek and move it back to its traditional navigating, meandering way, so that the salmon can return. And we had salmon that's listed, but not anymore, because we created the environment for them. So do what you can in your own backyard where you can, and if you're blessed to be able to be effective in these political forums to help them do the right thing, so that we in this forum can do the right thing.
Thanks, Ron. Murray, please.
Yeah, Ron and Sue are talking about collaboration at various scales, and I think that's really what's important. John, you asked the question of what the PSC can do, but it's just as important to be able to do things in your backyard and your own territories. Earlier, I talked about a crisis, what I deem a crisis in the lower Fraser, but it's even worse in the mid Fraser. It's even worse in the upper Fraser, because all the fish that pass through our territory aren't making it all the way home to our colleagues and friends up the Fraser watershed. But all that to say is crisis often leads to an ability to collaborate. Once you drop your guard in terms of fighting over what's left and realizing we're fighting over what's left, everything goes by the wayside, and you're able to work with people you thought you couldn't be able to work with. You start creating alliances and MOUs, and that's the first thing I guess we realized, is that as Lower Fraser folks and Stallow, we can't manage in isolation. We better start working with others in the Fraser watershed and those in the marine area. So all of a sudden MOUs started popping up. The guards of our respective nations dropped, and we've got this fairly convenient place to work amongst each other. And not only that, with stakeholders and sectors, recreational, commercial sector. Man, we used to fight on the Fraser for whatever, and that's when the fish were abundant. never mind when we're talking about what's left. So all that to say, I truly believe that crisis does lead to collaboration if you're willing to drop your guard a little bit when the time comes. So yeah, these scales of opportunities, now is the time. Probably 4 or 5 decades ago was the time, as I mentioned earlier, to start this work. But here we are, and we got nothing left. In my view, not much left to fight over. So we need to start and maintain working together.
Thanks, Murray. Please, Russell.
Yeah, I was just going to say that the question was, you know, what can we do in the PSC to improve abundance and productivity and resiliency? And one of the things that I think has been a continual thing that the PSC continues to work on, and I hope that they continue to work on it, and that's the modeling portion of it. And, you know, in the AABM fisheries, once the abundance index is set, then we have, you know, an amount of fish that we're going to go and be able to harvest. And the model, we know, sometimes over predicts and sometimes under predicts what's going on out there, and we don't know until that comes back. And so I hope that the PSC, as they continue to evaluate this, looks at ways to gather real-time data that allow for some changes to that to take place, so that we don't over harvest something that, you know, is coming back in a low run. Or that we don't miss harvest opportunity. We've all talked about wanting opportunity up and down the coast to be able to meet the needs of various groups for various reasons, and that we don't underharvest in years where we have abundance that wasn't captured in the model. And so I think that the commission, as we're working through modeling, can continue to look for ways to take into account real-time data, whether that's early season test fisheries or, you know, I know we explored that a little bit in this last negotiation, and there's probably some hiccups that need to be ironed out, but the CPUE was one of the things that was designed to try and capture real-time data on the fishing grounds to show what was there, in hopes of actually reflecting the return that's coming back, and not something that was just captured in a model. So.
Thanks, Russell. In order to allow us enough time to get to some questions in the audience, I think we can pivot to the last set of questions. Just to summarize where I heard people coming from in the last discussion, Sue talked about we're living in an environment of very polarized views here and outside the PSC tent. But the PSC really is a forum, and I heard this echoed from a few people. The forum really is a good place to collaborate, to find common ground. It's been doing that, you know, for almost 40 years. Lots of compromise is needed. There are lots of different approaches, but this is the place to work across agencies and share best practices. She noted that some evolution within the PSC already happening, dedicating more time and people to modernizing our work and dealing with climate change. And Russell picked up on that thread, talking about a need to focus more on predictive capacity and real-time data. Ron talked about how the PSC, while it was designed to be a harvest management regime, really does need to not lose sight of the other H's, hatcheries and hydropower and habitat. While we're doing better than 30 years ago and the spirit of cooperation is still very much alive, we need to make sure we're coexisting with salmon as human populations take off, and looking at how the PSC can perhaps modify its harvest focus. Murray talked about how crisis can lead to enforce our hand in cooperating and collaborating. Now is the time, in his words, to collaborate while the resource is dwindling and people feel a sense of urgency. I think I heard embedded in that the PSC is a place to do that, as well as building on successes on the river and more domestically. And then Russell, picked up on this notion of modernizing and putting more effort into our predictive capacity, as I said. Our last set of questions is about the future. I think that's a good segue. The last few points that were made. I'll try to cherry pick a few. There were 6 or 7 questions thrown at the panelists ahead of time. Maybe I'll start with something that I heard McCoy and Murray stress, and that is what needs to be done to improve the prospects of a younger generation to be able to harvest salmon. There was talk about succession planning and getting, I think John talked about it too, getting people interested and engaged. Are there thoughts specifically about what we can do inside our community? McCoy.
Just, I think, I guess our viewpoint of how what we do now impacts future generations, and the reason why I start there is because like I stated when I first introduced myself, being a 7th generation descendant of a treaty signer in 1855, and his foresight, Chief Looking Glass and the other chiefs from the other 4 Columbia River tribes, their foresight to understand that the decisions that they were making would have impact on that many generations going forward, and so really, for me, I want for my descendants, 7 generations down the road, to be able to look back and saying, I'm really glad at that point in time they made these decisions, because if they didn't make these right decisions then, we wouldn't be here now. And as a Columbia River, we are salmon people, and as the salmon go, we go. In our creation stories, the salmon was the first animal that came forward before the time of the humans to say that he was giving his life on behalf of the humans that were to come, as one of our stories. And as long as we speak on his behalf is what we're doing now. And so, I have three young daughters, a 10, a 8, and a 6-year-old, and I want them to be able to understand what it is to be a nest purse, what to understand what it is to catch a fish, and we don't taking life is not, we take that seriously, and it's the nest purse people. When we used to bury pre-contact, we would bury along the streams in rock. And as everybody knows, how does salmon know how to get home? Well, it's by the scent of the streams. And so that's how we maintain that connection, is as our bodies wash back into the water system, that we became part of their food source for the salmon that were coming home. And so, to maintain that connection, that teaching, and that life cycle, is very important to us as tribal people. And as you begin to sever that tie, that impacts you, how you are and how you identify yourself, which goes to your very being. And so it's imperative for us to think of these things in that way, because each of you, whether you're a technical person, whether you're a manager, the work that you do is gonna have the impact, whether negative or positive. That's dependent on us and what we do and our foresight. And so I'm glad that that we're having this forum. We're in unprecedented times. A lot of the fish that coming back into our water system are endangered species. I want the fish to get out. It's like somebody being on life support. Our fish are on life support right now. I would like to get them just even back to the critical unit. and that's not even talking about getting them to be healthy, harvestable levels where we need them to be. There used to be tens of millions of fish that used to come back into the Columbia system. And, now we're down to millions, and that figure just keeps going down further and further. And so that really impacts us, culturally, spiritually, physically, because that's one of the healthiest things that you can eat. And now we're stuck eating processed foods, and it's impacting. There's high diabetic rates in tribal communities. If we had more salmon coming back with better habitat, that just improves our way of life. And so I'm glad we're having these discussions, and I hope that we continue to have them, and and then that would keep our finger on the pulse for the future generations.
Thanks, McCoy. Any other thoughts about the next generation and what the PSC could or couldn't do to get next generations involved? Russell.
John, I was just gonna say, I think PSC does this pretty well, actually, but I think that, we can always look for ways to improve. But one of the things, and it's not just in this forum, but in other forums like the North Pacific Fisheries Management Council and the Halibut Commission, I've always been really amazed to watch some fishermen, some of them who have very limited formal education, go toe to toe with PhDs and people that hold really high degrees. And I think the thing that allows them to do that in those forums is an innate knowledge of what's going on in those fisheries. They're out on the grounds and they're experiencing those things. And like John said earlier, no 2 years are the same. And so I think one thing that we can do to make sure that that this resource lasts into perpetuity is to do whatever we can to close the gap between policymakers and those people that are out on the grounds that have that familiarity with what's happening, and that we use that knowledge. We use the tribal knowledge. We use the knowledge from fishermen. We use, the data that's collected in fisheries science. And we use all of those things to be able to make the best, most informed decision that we can as we're trying to manage the resource.
Thanks, Russell. That's helpful. We're at about 12 after the hour. We're due to break at 1:30. We had allotted about 20 minutes for questions. Maybe now is a good time to take that break for questions. We have some microphone helpers here in the audience. If you would like, raise your hand and someone will get you a microphone. And we also have some people online that Lori's monitoring. Got someone in the back, and then I'll get to you.
Well, one of the things there that we've never hear about from this body is the smolts going out. You got to have smolts going out in order to have fish coming back. But then they introduce species here of predator fish that are consuming, and the birds, the pelicans, and cormorants and terns and seagulls are consuming those smolts, and nobody pays attention to that. You got to manage from smolt to adult in order to have means to harvest. And the other thing is, remember, they're not toys. When the water's warm, we have to stop checking their genetics with the scales. But yet, the recreationals can go out and hook and catch them and then release them. When the water's hot, leave them alone. They're not toys to play with. They're food source for the people that were here. And there was when we managed the resource, there was over 20. I'm talking about the Columbia River now. That's where I live. And there was up to 20 million fish in that Columbia Basin. So we need to start remembering what is consuming those, because we're just putting fish into the river to feed those birds, to feed those pikes and all of those other introduced species of fish that are in there now. So we're not looking at the whole thing. We're only planning for the ocean. But you got to have, just like our people, we have to have children in order to have a future, for the future there. So, the salmon are the same, and they are not dumb. They've survived lava flows, mudslides, and all of the other things that have harmed the water. But my fear is they will not survive the federal biologists, because they will not let supplement and to rebuild those runs. Oh, they're inferior because they're in a hatchery. Well, that's where they got the eggs from, our natural fish. They're not dumb. They'll rehabilitate themselves. Just leave them alone, let them be. So we got to start talking about that. Smolts. All the smolts we put into the river are consumed before they're able to get out. The slack water, the warm water, that gives them the ability to be harvested by those predator fish and the birds. Right below the dams there on my river, those pelicans there's thousands of them circling around there. And the seagulls, and they know when they're coming in because they're up there when the water comes out and they're getting them. So we need to do the whole picture, not just, oh, we could have catch this much and we got to catch that much. We need to let them rebuild themselves. Let those hatchery fish, let them mingle. They will survive. They're not dumb.
Thanks, Wilbur. Anyone want to speak to Wilbur's points about smolts and predators and whole system approaches? Ron.
Well, the one thing that Wilbur's point strikes me is the water temperature he touched on. That's a huge problem that we are very conscious of. We in Washington are working hard at trying to get legislation to widen the riparian zones for all of our creeks, rivers and creeks, so that we can give shade to the river, because the warming water is a problem. Whether the smoke's coming down or the salmon going up to spawn, the water temperature is a problem, and we need to look for ways to improve those conditions so that we can be successful regardless of where they are in the cycle.
Thanks, Ron. Ed, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Wilbur. Really interesting, this panel, put the panel together. In my entire life, I can say I've been an active treaty fisherman since I was 7 years old. And that's 1960. So this change that we talk about in this, I guess, 60 some odd years, 63, 64 years of my lifetime is very visible to me. What's happened on the coast and being in fisheries management all of my adult life, and being here when we put the treaty together. We put the treaty together, I think, is partly a result of what the 4 coastal tribes did, or the 3 coastal tribes did, and the Columbia River tribes about all the prior interceptions. It was called the All Citizens case, the non-treaty accounting case, played very largely into this process. So we know what those fisheries are out there in the ocean in front of us terminal area fishermen. And we are, with us coastal tribes with treaty rights, have terminal area rights, or we have pre-terminal area rights if we go out into that ocean. And we do. In this process, I've been here since day one, like some of you in this room, because of the leadership, like that came out of my tribe, the Quinault tribe, and Guy McMines, Jim Hart, Joe Delacruz. That was with every other tribe that I can think of from our area in the 4 Columbia River tribes. We're at a whole different place. And I've sat on the Southern panel for I don't know how many years now, probably close to 15 or 20. And those changing dynamics are real. The fisheries management changes in those dynamics are real. So taking the advice of someone here's been since day one, and a principal in Dr. Gary Morishima, that I've been around all my adult life. Believe he came to work for Quinault in 1973 or 1974. Have been asking us the right questions as someone that technical and the folks that they work with about these changes, these indicators that we're seeing, but we haven't been able to, I believe that's why we're doing this. How do we put that into actionable pieces? Those fisheries managers can make those fisheries calls when they're needed to be done. And where do they fit in the structure here? The structure here. Now we know Canada's process is different than at least us in the Pacific Council arena of that March and April timeframe for everything that goes on in that summer and fall. And because we're about a month or two off, those kinds of decisions are real critical. It's a fact, our rivers are running low. And when they're running low in the summer with temperatures the way they are, our adults are dying pre-spawn. Our out migrants find the same journey that Wilbur's talking about with the pelicans and the cormorants and every other Caspian terns, whatever, as well as the pinnipeds that have to be managed. But how do we take this kind of a discussion and put it into actionable units that we can try to weave through these management systems to make those kinds of calls? Because with everything that's come upon us and our tribes down here that have the listed stocks that number in 2 handsful, and none of them have been recovered. So if you remember when we had the Larry Rudder Award, when Gary gave us, his view of his journey through life. And one of the things he said that we're not going to be able to harvest manage our way out of this. So do we have a role here that we can force to come out at the Pacific Salmon Commission to address these critical habitat issues? I mean, I think we need to think about that voice. I know Ron is with us lockstep as tribes and our tribal leaders to try to fold that into what we're seeing and how we get business done, and have had some good results that have to talk about our terminal areas. They're in bad need of recovery. We knew that from the jump, but now with what we see in these environmental indicators, it's not good. So you have that up and down. The gentleman from Alaska talks about the up and down nature of these stocks. We had 2 instances recently, but I can go back all the way to 85 and 87 in the Chehalis River. But 2 within the last 15 years, actually 7 years, 8 years. The forecasted numbers for wild fish and hatchery fish on the river that I fish in were large, 140, 160,000 naturals. Complete bust. I mean, they did not show up whatsoever. We didn't even make the 35,400 spawning objective. We saw it again this fall. 49 years I've been on that river. We were forecasted at 140,000 naturals, about 60,000 wild. I fished 2 days the first week of the run, first week of October, which is a peak, and 4 days the next. I never caught 10% of what was forecasted. We never caught. The tribe never caught. They didn't show up. We don't know whether we quit. The Quinault Indian Nation closed all its fisheries after we got enough data in October. None. They didn't show up. We'll see if we make spawning objective or not. We're in trouble. I thank you for this kind of work. We need to listen to our technical folks and try to find pathways to help answer those questions. If it's money, tell us. We'll go get it. Times are tough, but this is what it's going to take for all of us to enjoy our way of life. You know, I really thank the tribes that we are consistent with who we are, place-based. Those treaties made us place-based. We can't go anywhere else. That's where our rights exist. That's who we're from. That's never going to change. So we're in this, and we need to help figure out what exactly, where is this going, and how do we, as influencers, as managers, as people that are here with you in the rank and file, what do we need to do? Because we have to be the best at this part of it while we figure out the habitat piece. Only way we're going to make it. So I'm just expressing kind of last 15 years or so, we've really kind of been on this edge, but it just doesn't feel like we're getting there. And that's what I'm curious about is this put together to weave through the myriad of things that are not getting us on that level, and what do we need to do? Or we're out of business.
Thanks, Ed.
Where'd he go?
So there's a call to action there from Ed.
Thanks.
Understanding how we can weave a more responsive system into getting technical advice up to policy managers, and perhaps taking a more holistic view under the treaty that what I heard Ed say was a more holistic view that incorporates habitat loss and habitat pressures. Any thoughts to his call to action? Murray.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Ed and Wilbur. Really good ones. I don't have an answer for you that's going to be really articulate, but the one thing that resonates with me with Wilbur's comments about having to be responsible for fish from adult or from smolts to adult, that resonates with me a lot, because when we first started the Lower Fraser Fisheries Alliance, we thought we could manage in isolation within a 200-kilometer stretch of the river. Well, we found out really quickly that's not possible. So it was shortly after that we decided, well, in our statement of solidarity, we need to be responsible for the fish at their spawning territories as well as wherever they migrate. So all of a sudden we're responsible to some extent from the headwaters of the Fraser River to Alaska. Well, hell, we don't have the capacity for that, but we need to make the connection to the people. And so I think, Wilbur, your comments also resonate with me, is that we don't really have a fish problem, we have a people problem, and people need to change. So I really like that if we vacated, the fish would probably be okay. But we're not vacating anytime soon, so we have to do better working together. So that whole statement of solidarity and an ability to work from the headwaters to Alaska, pulled in to the very fact that our little domestic regime of 30 First Nations has to work internationally too. So it's all about scalability, but I don't really have an answer for you, Ed, but it just needs to be people working together, willing to collaborate from all scales, from the riverfront right up to the international scale. We'll continue to do it. We have to do it. We don't have a choice. We have an inherent and traditional cultural obligation to do it.
Thanks, Murray. Ron, and then we have one
Just
more
quickly,
question.
Ed's call to action, there's so many pieces to it. One of them is about the next generation of experts. So I'm really delighted that PSC has initiated the Lorraine Loomis Scholarship to encourage the younger generation to get into fish management, biology, technicians, so that is something that is meaningful. So for me, it's a shout out. I have deep appreciation for Lorraine's commitment to salmon. Many of us know her, remember her spirit. So it's the next generation as well. It's a part of the solution.
Thanks, Ron. And we had a question on this side, Diego.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Jeremy Maynard. I'm on the Southern panel from Canada. I'm a recreational fisherman and a fishing guide, and I'm a guy who came from Point East 50 years ago and was lucky enough to land in life in this part of the world in the Northwest, and I've been fishing and guiding ever since. And I don't have a question, but I just have an observation, and it's related to the environmental uncertainty that we're trying to address here. And in my time on the water, I've been lucky enough to observe everything that's going on, or a lot of what's going on. And even more than the ups and downs of salmon, and there have been both, obviously between areas and years and decades and species and so forth, but is the bait fish that salmon depend on. And the changes as a result, I'm sure, of environmental uncertainty are even more stark in my mind with herring, with pilchards, with euphausids, with squid, with sandlance. I mean, I've just seen massive changes from abundance to complete absence. I mean, total absence in large areas, and then revivals and comebacks and so forth. And it's just been astonishing to me when I look back over the 50 years I've been lucky enough to spend on the water. And so, all those things largely support in the salmon world, most particularly Chinook and coho, but the dynamics that are driving those massive changes in those bait species are, I'm sure, also affecting the other three salmon species that we depend on. And obviously I don't have any advice about how we're going to address that, but I just wanted to say that in our discussion about environmental uncertainty and changes and how it's changing and challenging our salmon management world, the bait story in my mind, and of course that affects everything, not just fish, just all the seabirds too, is even more stark in my mind. So anyway, I just wanted to pass it on. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. So we're just about at time. I know there are some commissioners here who need to get to their next meeting. Are there I was going to open up to closing thoughts, but maybe I'll say a few words and then I'll open it up to the panel to bring us home. I heard today several different viewpoints, but there were some common threads in that. I've heard that the Pacific Salmon Commission is seen as a ray of hope, a platform where all these disparate interests from Alaska down to the Columbia Basin can get together. And whether you're indigenous or non-indigenous, this is the home where people can come to resolve their differences. And if there is a way to do that, the Salmon Commission is well poised to do it. Although, as Sue said, there could be a way to modernize it and look at ways of breaking down some of the silos that have built up over 40 years. I heard a sense of optimism in some regions of the treaty as climate change warms the ocean and drives productivity up. And I've heard a sense of dismay about loss of food security and cultural security and economic security, no matter the sector. But as a fisherman myself, I know that people that are involved in fisheries are eternally optimistic and hopeful that we can hitch our wagon to the next part of change and leverage what we've built here since 1985 to bring about the best possible outcome. Is there anyone on the panel who would like to say any closing remarks before we go on? Sue. Okay.
Like I said, brief. I think we've heard some interesting things in the comments and really reflective of what we've heard across the panel, which is quite frankly a very diverse community all in itself. Russell talked about closing the gap between we heard some comments from Wilbur about looking at the whole life cycle. We heard some other comments about bringing it together. And really, I think simply this is a community that is unique, as you said, John, and it's a real opportunity to be the change that we want to see, not just to respond to changes, but to actually look at what's going on inside this organization and all the people who come to it and all the people who bring the interests of the other people that they live and work with in their community. No matter where your community is, no matter what it looks like, no matter what it is, this is a unique opportunity. We have some activities going on here. We need to broaden our thinking and start to think about, instead of, for example, renegotiating in 2029, what do we do in 2029 for 2039 and 2049? And I think we've got some opportunities. There are folks doing work. We need to shine our light on them, turn our attention to them, listen to them, and solicit that kind of advice. We're unique. Let's take the opportunity and do everything we can to be the change ourselves.
Thanks, Sue. And with that, I'll extend the commission's deep thanks to all the panels who took their time out of a really busy schedule this week. You didn't have to do this, you volunteered to do it. And I know the audience is really appreciative. I am as executive secretary, and thanks. We will be following up.